cast your minds back, if you will, if you can, about 25 years, and everybody was getting very excited. This is before Office 365, before smartphones, before Azure, and everybody was getting very excited about a particular Microsoft product. It was in the newspapers, it was on television, it was, anybody? Of course, yes, Windows 95. Everybody was getting very excited about Windows 95, and the calculator wasn't perfect, so we thought, great, we can build a calculator application for Windows 95, and later we updated it and it was for Windows 98. Turns out it's quite a difficult thing, and this is the oldest piece of software you'll see demonstrated, I'm sure, by a long way at Ignite this week. It turns out to be quite different because calculator chips are usually base 10, because we've got 10 fingers, or most of us have 10 fingers. That's kind of what the talk is about. And computers use base 2 arithmetic, so you get all kinds of rounding errors. So we solved all those problems, and then we thought, oh, because we can resize the screen, or we can change the font color and the font size, we can change the size of the buttons and make them bigger and change the font and choose the font. Why would we not allow our users to do that? And we can make the shortcuts work as well, keyboard shortcuts, so people can use it without a mouse. And we didn't really think much about this. And then a very strange thing happened. This is 1990s. We started to get emails. Actually, we started to get some letters from users saying, oh, I have a disabled son who has learning difficulties, and this is really helpful to them. My father is retired, his vision isn't as good as it was, and this is a great help, and they can use this application. And you know, a care worker who looks after people with learning difficulties. This is probably the highlight of my career, that this application that we wrote really by accident was able to solve all these accessibility needs. So that was a wonderful thing. Now, we don't have to leave it to chance. We can do it on purpose and deliberately, because there's lots of accessibility guidance about how to write applications and websites that are accessible and are available to all users, not just a few users. So my name's Bill Ayres. My company has been writing software for over 30 years now, and this really is the purpose of this talk, is to look at some of these accessibility issues and share a bit of experience about how we can make better software. If you think about accessibility, you might think, oh, it's a legal obligation, which it may well be, that we have to make our website accessible, for example. You might think of it in terms of ticking a box, or you might think about it in terms of just morally doing the right thing. And that's fine, and that's a good reason, but I would argue there's probably a commercial reason to do accessibility, just because of the number of people that it affects. And I would also argue, and I hope I'll be able to show to you, that accessible design is pretty much equivalent to good design. So nobody likes software that sucks, and so we can build better software if we make it accessible. So let's talk about real people, not people in advertisements and in films, but real people. A number you'll probably see this week is 1.2 billion. That's the number of people in the world with accessibility needs who self-identify as being disabled in some way. And that's probably the tip of the iceberg, actually. In addition to that, there's people who have a temporary disability. They might have, for example, a repetitive strain injury and not be able to use a mouse. All these kinds of things that affect people for months or years. That brings another group of people that have accessibility needs. We also, as we get older, frankly, we start to need help, particularly with vision and with hearing. I absolutely hate having to use reading glasses, and I'm always sort of squinting at things to avoid putting them on. This is a sort of a an assistive technology that a lot of us has used, and it's over the years, in the 14th century, it really extended the working life of people, of craftsmen. But that now brings us up, interestingly, to a sort of a majority of our users have some kind of accessibility need or other. So from a commercial point of view, it's just the majority of our users. Now, all of us get old eventually, so you could say that sooner or later we're all going to fall into this category, the vast majority of us. So what can we do about it? We need accessibility guidelines, and this is a particularly useful for, I'm from the UK, and the United Kingdom Home Office have some accessibility guidelines. It's called Designing for Accessibility. You can download it, it's free to use. It's a set of posters that have some great guidelines, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, this is an excellent resource to use. Let's run through some of the categories, and I've sort of summarized them for you. So one is anxiety, and I'm not just talking about when we become anxious. To be honest, I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety myself at the moment, but this is for people who have some particular clinical condition, and in that case, it's really difficult for people with these conditions to use a website that says, provide me this information, and you go away and you find the information and you come back to the website and it says, oh, I'm terribly sorry, you've timed out. We'll have to start again and start entering. This gives people with anxiety a lot of discomfort and difficulty, but who likes that experience anyway? It's just bad design. And allowing you to check the answers before you submit them it's just bad design if you don't allow people to do that. So big problems for people with anxiety, but just generally bad design as well. Autistic spectrum, that's a very broad range of disabilities, but it's helpful if you have simple and consistent layouts for people on the autistic spectrum. But then again, you think about it, why would you want to build a website with a complex and inconsistent layout? It just doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? But some people do. So maybe we need to train our developers or our content developers to use better English, use simpler English. When you look at people who are hearing impaired, then it's advantageous to write in plain English. And a lot of these accessibility needs are around not using complex English, And if you're not, users with dyslexia often want to change to a particular font. So give people the option to change the font or to change the contrast, much as we did in that calculator application that I showed at the beginning. That's very helpful, but it's also helpful to people generally as well. Now, there's some great opportunities with AI and machine learning. We've reached a point really in the last 10 years, maybe even the last 5 years, where a lot of these technologies like language processing, speech to text, computer vision have become really on a par, achieved parity with human abilities. So they've just, in the last few years, become really useful to solve all kinds of accessibility problems. So we can use those, and that story is going to get better and better. It's a very exciting time to be solving these kinds of problems. We'll have self-driving cars, which will help people with mobility issues as well. We can use language processing to simplify the text automatically, because it can extract the meaning, the semantics of a piece of text. So it's a rich area for artificial intelligence to help us in building these solutions. Now, people with low vision, again, you want to be able to make content scalable. Color contrast is important as well. Again, you do sometimes see web designs where people, for artistic reasons, will have text with very low contrast, the text with a background. That makes it very difficult for, well, generally for users, but particularly people with vision impairment. Now, there's some great accessibility features in Windows. So we can use that, for example, to change the text size, and I use some of these myself. We can use the magnifier, that's useful, but for color filters, we can change the contrast in Windows. Now, it means the application has to follow the Windows the Windows color settings for this to work for applications. But generally, it allows us to do things like change the color ratios to assist people with color blindness, for example, which is another vision impairment. Now, in SharePoint, for many years, I worked on the UK Health Service, Department of Health website on SharePoint 2007, and we built the Choices, NHS Choices website on top of that technology, and we had great difficulty meeting standards like WCAG, AA accessibility standards. I'm very happy to say that now in the modern pages, this is greatly improved. Perhaps not perfect, but the accessibility is hugely improved. And when we look at the theming engine, and of course every version of SharePoint has to have a new theming engine, but the one that we have now is all of the built-in themes are accessible out of the box. Now, what happens when we want to customize those themes? There's a very nice feature when we go to the theme designer. We find that they will actually warn us if we set our theme, for example, to make the text color here. I'm going to make the text color very faint or pale, and I get a warning that my text color contrast is off. And I can go back and I can it tells you what the problem is. I can go and fix it by making the background dark, but now, of course, the checkboxes don't look so good. So, I can then go and fix that, and then I get the green that it's okay. Now, there's no taste checker here, so it might not be a very attractive color scheme, but that's up to you. But you can at least warn you if you make a mistake in setting up the color contrast. Personally, I find that I find that in PowerShell, for example, although this is good color contrast, I have great difficulty reading that. I don't know if anybody else has this problem, but the red on the very dark background I find really difficult to read. That's when you really need, it's the error message, that's what you need to be able to read. So, there are other things than just the ratio, but you have to look at it as well. Now, people with physical disabilities, people design sometimes websites or applications with tiny buttons which are very difficult to hit the click area on. Why would anybody do that? Come on, seriously. Why are people making these tiny click areas? I mean, it's irritating to people who don't have any particular motor disability, but for people, why would you put an obstacle in the path of people who are suffering from physical disability? It's just madness. We just need to educate ourselves to do this right, and it'll be better for people with these problems, but better for the broader community as well, and the same with providing shortcuts. Now, screen readers are slightly different in that typically what you'll do in a web browser, it will generate the UI document object model, which is what you see on the screen, and then there will be a separate accessibility tree that it generates by looking at the elements in the page. Now, if you use semantic HTML5 elements, generally that will work reasonably well. If you start doing things like single page applications or very complex controls, you might need to use some technology like ARIA, for example, to give some additional attributes to elements to give this screen reader or this accessibility tree more of a steer as to what is important. Why is it such an issue? Well, I've got an example here.
Starting narrator. Settings
I've
window.
simulated a screen reader.
Minimize settings button. Stockted.com. Microsoft Edge window. Stockted.com. Stockted.com. Tools. Home link. Incomplete. Loading page. Articles link. Articles link. Messages about link. Contact link. Messages. SharePoint Doctor 1950s.
This is how people use screen readers. They'll have the text will be read out very fast. It's all coming through. So you can see why it's so important that the navigational elements are signposted to the screen reader or other assistive technology so that works well. So in Edge, for example, in the developer console, there's a tool here for checking the accessibility tree, and it will show you what the accessibility tree looks like. And you can use that, and there's a whole bunch of other tools here. So this is a very good link if you want to take a picture of this. This will give you lots of accessibility testing tools that you can use to improve the accessibility, particularly of websites. So lots of accessibility features that have a primary application for helping people with specific accessibility needs, but they're actually, in a lot of cases, they're applicable to people with general needs. You know, the voice recognition and text-to-speech might be just people who have their hands occupied by driving a vehicle, for example. You know, the more we use these technologies, the more perhaps we'll encourage people developing applications to implement them properly. So one final point, which is a sort of my personal top tip, is older people especially don't like it when things change. So I'm not saying, you know, that we all want to move forward with technology and everything's changing rapidly and we're getting excited about technological change, but sometimes you just have to take a step back and say, are we just changing something for the sake of it? Are we just doing a new UI because we want to have a new UI? So have a thought for older people who, you know, time is moving fast, they don't like change. We know from speaking and observing older people using, if you have users who are in that age category, just try not to change things too quickly. Here's some really nice feedback very recently from somebody who's used that same application, you know, which we haven't touched for 20 years, and say, I've used it since it came out in 1995. Now I'm retired. I was a maths teacher. I used to project the image onto the class for the class so that they could use it. Will this program still work on Windows 10? Of course it will, because Windows 10 has excellent backwards compatibility. People sometimes don't like change. So let's design for accessibility. Let's design for real people, and let's make sure that we empower every person on the planet. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was useful, and I've got a couple of slides with some resources if you want to take a picture of that. There's numerous tools that you can use. Ally can be an accessibility ally. It's A, 11 letters, and Y, accessibility. And if you'd be so kind as to evaluate this session, I'd be very grateful. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.